Good morning. One of the things that has just struck me, it's just good to be with brothers and sisters. This is home, and there isn't much other place on earth that feels like our church family, the brothers and sisters, when we're together and we're worshiping together. It is God Himself who has formed us together as a family. And I just want to let you know how good it is for me every single Sunday to enter this building and to be a part of the church that is here. We are dealing with the book of James, and as we see, James does not pull any punches. He does not hold anything back. He says it like it is. He is not one to mince any words. How many other metaphors can I use? He says what he means, and he means what he says. And as we take a look at James, we have talked about the fact that there are really two different ways of living. You can be a double-minded person in the world, or you can be a single-minded person who sees things from God's way. You can have the way of wisdom, or you can be unwise. You can try to live in a different way, but when you do that, you are not really seeing reality in the way that it truly is. And so James wants to put us firmly in one camp. We don't want to be in the world's camp. We want to be firmly in God's camp. And as we do that, it affects how we live. It affects what we think. It affects everything that we do. And as we take a look at these verses in chapter 4, what we see again really is a theme that has been woven through all of chapter 3 and all of chapter 4. He keeps on going back to this idea of what you say and how you say it. Taming the tongue is the heading that I have in my Bible over chapter 3. But as we go through and we see what is going, we see all this quarreling, we see the way of peace, and we see all this behind all this, we see this thing that has to do with the language and the language we use. And so, as we finish up chapter 4, we're weaving that through again. We're talking about our language. We're talking about what we say and how we say it. And so I want us to read verses 13 through 17 of James chapter 4. And it says, "Now listen, you who say, 'Today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money.' Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, 'If it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that.' As it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who does the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." And we take a look at this and we see these verses and we think about them and we think about, well, it looks like just someone is kind of planning here. Someone is just trying to think about exactly what they're doing and how they're going about it. And we know that there needs to be some kind of preparation in our life for how we are doing things and how we are acting. After all, weren't those bridesmaids entering into the wedding feast prepared? Don't we see that? So what exactly is going on here? And I think that when we take a look at the problem as it truly is, what we have here is we have the illusion of control in all of this. Think about this. Today or tomorrow we will go into that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. What James says here is you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What he's saying there is a reality that we need to get firmly into our heads and firmly into our minds. If we are to be a part of what God's way of thinking is, we need to realize that there are a lot of things we just don't have control over. There are a lot of things that we can't say one way or the other what will and will not happen. We are not promised another day. We are not promised another moment. Jesus may come before this service is over. We've said that before. We can say it again. If he does, hallelujah. But we cannot say that we have any control over our lives and our situation. I want us to take a look at John 1, 10 through 13. This is one of my favorite passages to go to in all of this. This is a verse that we looked at in my Bible class at camp. We looked at all of John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18, and there's this beautiful, beautiful language that John uses about the Word becoming flesh, and we know that is Jesus, and we have all of this that is going on. But what we have here in verse 10 is something that is going on that I think is important. And it talks about Jesus, and it says, "He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor human decision or a husband's will, but born of God." Well, what does this have to do with James? How does this tie in? What are we talking about here? What I want to talk about here is again, this idea of control. Because if you talk to people today, people like to think that they are in control of so many things. We can decide. We can be whomever we want to be. We can do whatever we want to do. We can act in whatever we want to act. And one of the things that I brought up to my Bible class is that we have this tendency to think this, and yet there is a reality. In the most important parts of who we are and why we are who we are, we don't have much say. Why was I born? Why was I born in Camden, New Jersey, of all places? I've asked my parents that many times. They're here right now. You can take it up with them. I was born in Camden, New Jersey. My dad's a Texan. My mom's from Tennessee. My kids were born in Prague and Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and exotic places like that. I was born in Camden, New Jersey. I didn't have any say. Why was I born when I was born? I didn't have any say. Why was I born at the end of the 1960s? Why is it that the world seems to be going apace? I used to be able to change the time on a VCR. That was a big deal back in the 80s. Now my kids are doing things with their phones I don't even understand. I feel like I'm behind all the time. I don't have any control over when I was born. I don't have any control to whom I was born. My parents are my parents. I didn't have any say in the matter. I didn't have any say that I was going to be born in the United States. Why wasn't I born in some place that was worse than Camden, New Jersey? Is there a place that's worse than Camden, New Jersey? Yeah, there are a lot of people who would give everything that they have to say that they were born in Camden, New Jersey, and not somewhere else. There is all of that. Why was I born a boy and not a girl? See where I'm going with all of this? I was talking to my campers because really our teenagers are dealing with an awful lot of things. They're being told all sorts of things. And I don't want to belittle any of this. I know that the struggle is real in so many ways, and we as a church need to figure out what in the world we're going to do about some of these questions that are going on. But we have basically said in our society that you can make all sorts of decisions that you don't have any say in at all. And we've got to be able to handle that situation. We've got to be able to handle things with the gospel truth. There's a lot that you can't control. But John 1, 10 through 13 says that there is something that you control that can control, that is greater than anything else in the world. And this really is the gospel message in short. We're not going to talk an awful lot about becoming a Christian in this lesson, but we can talk about it right here. What the Bible affirms over and over again is where you were born, how you were born, to whom you were born, all of that doesn't matter. What matters is that you have the ability to make a choice to follow God or not. You have a choice to be His child. Who are your parents? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you've got great parents. It doesn't matter if you have terrible parents. You can choose to be a child of the Most High God. It doesn't matter when you were born. It doesn't matter what circumstances you are in. To those who received Him, to those who believed in His name, He gave them the right to become children of God. April 13th, 1980, I made a choice. I put myself to death in the waters of baptism. I was put to death in the waters of baptism. And I came up out of that watery grave a new creation. I made that choice. Christianity, on the one hand, affirms that there are all sorts of things that you do not have a choice about, but in the things that matter the absolute most, you have absolute say. I was reborn. I chose that day. I died that day, and I was raised to life that day. That's the choice we had. James's problem is that these people have the illusion of control. I will do this. I will go on and spend a year there. I will make money, and I will do all of this. But also we see that there is an attitude of entitlement that is going on here. There's an interesting little YouTube station that I listen to, a YouTube channel, I guess you call it, and it's called Veritasium. And one of the things that they were talking about, and one of their things, it's a scientific thing, some of the things I agree with, some that I don't, but it's very hard science in a lot of ways, but this one was a soft science one, and they were talking about whether or not the success that we got was because of hard work or because of luck. And one of the things that they talked about is the fact that you got NHL hockey players. And NHL hockey players stand a better chance of being an NHL hockey player if they were born in the first quarter of the year. January, February, and March. Because that's the cutoff time for the age difference in hockey. And so people who are born in January, February, and March get into those hockey leagues, and they're a little bit older, they're a little bit faster, they're a little bit stronger, so they are given more ice time, they're given more time to practice, they're given more opportunities to play. And you talk to an NHL hockey player and you ask them, what is your secret to success? They're not going to say, well, I was born on January 31st. They talk about their hard work. They talk about how they worked hard and they got up early and they got their ice time and they did all that. I'm afraid oftentimes we treat our Christianity, we treat our lives as if somehow we are deserving of all the blessings and things that we get. I will do this. I have this talent. I have this ability. It carries over into the spiritual realm. If we take a look at Luke 18, 9 through 14, that's the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee. And what we've got is we have a Pharisee in that particular passage, and what he is doing, if you want to take a look there, I'm just going to go through it in the reading, and it says, he prayed about himself. He didn't pray to God. He didn't glorify God like we've been doing in our song service. He prayed about himself, and he says, Dear Lord, I thank you that I am not like other men. And he talks about the contributions he makes. He talks about all the good things that he does and all this kind of stuff. And then you have the tax collector who is not even looking up to heaven. And he's saying, Dear Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And what we have is a tax collector that Jesus says goes home justified. And we have a Pharisee who goes away unjustified. In Luke 14, 7 through 11, we've got Jesus talking about people who are invited to a banquet, and they go and he says, if you're invited to a banquet, take a seat of least honor so that you can be honored when the person who invites you to come up to a higher spot. But if you choose the highest spot, you're going to be humbled because they're going to say, oh, that's reserved for somebody else who's more important than you. What we have here is we have an attitude of entitlement in all of this. I will do this. I can do this. I can make this happen for myself. It's not a matter of living in the humility that we live under God's will. And what blessings we have and what we have been given is because God has blessed us, not because of some great business acumen that I may or may not have. What is the purpose? And what we have here is we have an entire idea about what is the forgotten purpose of our lives. And as we take a look at this, we see that really what is going on in this particular passage is this attitude that is a selfish attitude. It is that entitlement attitude, but it is also this attitude that I'm going to make this money, I'm going to do these things, and what I am going to do is I'm going to spend what I've got on myself. And so this right here ties into this context of what we've got going on in 3, 4, and all of this. And if we take a look at chapter 4, verse 3, What we have is, when you ask, you do not receive, because you ask with the wrong motives, that you may spend what you get on your pleasures. You don't consider God's ways at all. You're not thinking about all of that. We have the parable of the man with the bigger barns. In Luke chapter 12, 16 through 31, we're not going to read that, but what we have going on there is we have a guy who was blessed with a large crop. And he takes a look at this and he says, you know what I'm going to do is, I'm going to tear down my small barns, and I'm going to build bigger barns, and I'm going to take my ease, and I'm going to live off this produce that I have made, and I'm just going to kick back and relax, because that's just what I want to do. The language that Jesus uses is much like the language that James uses. He says, you fool, don't you realize that your life this night will be required of you? And we take a look at James's language in so many times, and I don't know if you've caught on to this at all, but it seems that here we have James, who is a brother of Jesus, who came to Jesus. He was converted to Jesus. He did not believe in Jesus through Jesus' entire life. But we have this entire situation where Jesus appears to James after the resurrection, and we see that James decides to fully embrace who Jesus was. But I get the impression that James very diligently heard the words that Jesus said, because so much of what he says in his book comes right out of Jesus' own mouth. We have this idea in 1 Corinthians where Paul talks about those people who don't believe in God. Why not eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die? But that really is from a passage in Isaiah, and I'd like for us to turn there in Isaiah chapter 22. And in Isaiah chapter 22, we have the entire context of what is going on there. And I want us to see, really, again, it is a non-consideration of God and God's role in our lives. And what we have here is we have Jerusalem that is being surrounded by armies. We have Jerusalem that is experiencing some turmoil. And we have this entire situation where the city of David has breaches in its defenses, if we take a look at chapter 9. And it says, you saw that the city of David had many breaches in its defenses, and so you stored up water in the lower pool. You counted the buildings in Jerusalem and tore down houses to strengthen the wall. You built a reservoir between the two walls for the water of the old pool. But you did not look to the one who made it, or have regard for the one who planned it long ago. The Lord Almighty called on you that day to weep and wail, to tear out your hair and put on sackcloth. And what we have here is we have a population that should have understood what God was doing, but had totally cut him out of the deal, totally cut him out of the bargain. And you see what is going on in the city of Jerusalem, even in the face of all of this persecution. But see, there is joy and revelry, slaughtering of cattle and killing of sheep, eating of meat and drinking of wine. Let us eat and drink, you say, for tomorrow we die. And there is this attitude of spending what we have on what we want, not taking into consideration God's ways, not taking into consideration what he wants. And so the other way that we could take our resources is to use them for God's glory. We see this in chapter 1, verse 27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after widows and orphans in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. What we have here is we have a situation in which we have the opportunity to help people with our resources. This is what these are for. We should not be going out and saying, look, I'm going to go out to this city and I'm going to spend time there doing business and I'm going to make all this money for my own sake. Rather, how are we using it for our own good? We took a look at the shrewd manager in Luke 16:9 a few weeks ago when we were dealing with chapter 2 of James. But I think that it is important to note that Jesus says, use your treasures to make friends in heavenly places. And what you have here is you have this context of the shrewd manager who is using his resources so that he can make friends so that he doesn't have to go dig ditches. But we should be using our resources for God's glory so that we are building up a spiritual treasure house. In Luke 12, we'll go there. That's the final place that we're going to go in terms of our passages here. And I just lost my spot in James. In Luke 12, I want us to take a look at 35 through 48. It's the same passage. There's so much in here, but I think that it is important for us to know what is going on here in this. In this particular passage, Jesus is talking about living as if he is coming again, living as if the Master is coming again. And I see in this particular passage themes that James is very familiar with. You don't know when your life is going to end. You don't know how much time you've got. You don't know any of that. So we need to be living in that reality. We need to be living into that way of thinking. And so we have here in verses 42 through the end, we have this situation where the Lord answers, "Who then is a faithful and wise manager whom the master puts in charge of his servants to give them their food allowance at the proper time? It will be good for that servant to whom the master finds doing so when he returns. I tell you the truth, he will put him in charge of all his possessions. But suppose the servant says to himself, 'My master is taking a long time in coming.' And then he begins to beat the men servants and women servants and to eat and drink and get drunk. The master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and an hour when he is not aware. He will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the unbelievers. That servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what his master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows." I'm seeing that teacher analogy in chapter 3. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from the one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. And so we have in James these themes, we have these ideas, we have this going on where we have the opportunity to be good stewards of God's resources, to glorify Him and how we are dealing with them. I find it interesting that Jesus is talking about the distribution of food and those needful things to the master's servants. Those who want to please the master need to be about the master's work. James ends this particular section and says, "Anyone then who does the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." I think it's specifically tied to this particular context. I think what we have going on here is we have this section where, yes, you can go out and you can say that you're going to make money. You don't know if you're going to do that. You don't know. You're living in all that idea of you're in control. You're living in all that entitlement. You're living in all that attitude. And then when you do have money, when you do have resources, you go out and you spend it on yourself and you do all that. But you need to realize, if you know the good you ought to do and you don't do it, you're sinning. And what he's saying there is you need to be using your resources. And you need to be using what you've got for God's glory. He is specifically tying this to money in a lot of ways. He's tying this to boasting in a lot of ways. But we can tie this into our very lives. We owe God that. We owe Him our lives. We talked about that John passage. We talked about the ability to make that choice and to actually make a decision that is of eternal consequence. If this is the day that you've decided that you want to become a child of God, there is no time like the present. Don't put it off. If you're out there online right now and you see our phone number and you've got some questions about how to go about doing that, please give us a call. We are more than happy to help out in any possible way that we can. We're about kingdom business here. We want to expand the kingdom. We want to bring people into the kingdom. We want people to become disciples of Jesus Christ. And Jesus is very clear on that. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the one who sets the parameters. He is the one that sets the way that we do that. And we do that by obeying the gospel fully. We do that by submitting ourselves to the death of our sinful selves in the waters of baptism, coming out as a new creature, filled with the Holy Spirit, and dedicated to following Jesus for the rest of our lives. That's a decision that you've made today. Please come as we stand.